You wouldn't believe it. My stepmother kissed me.
And not just anywhere. It happened in her and my father's bedroom. I'm Silas, 21 years old, from a quiet little town called Willow Ridge. The day my father died, the world didn't shatter in one sudden crash. It just sank.
A heart attack, instant. No goodbyes, no warning.
The hospital felt like a dark void, buzzing fluorescent lights, the sharp tang of antiseptic.
A nurse with kindies.
A doctor who whispered, "I'm sorry," 3 times as if the words could patch the hole he'd just torn in my life. I sat on a hard plastic chair that squeaked every time I shifted, trying not to throw up. Marin sat beside me, silent, just holding my hand so tightly her nails dug crescents into my skin. I didn't pull away. People say grief comes in waves.
That's a lie.
It seeps in, slow and cold, like water sliding under a door.
You just sit there, numb, letting it swallow you.
There were only 3 of us in my family. My real mother left when I was 10.
Why?
A few words tossed like garbage, falling out of love, someone else, another state.
She never came back. 3 years later, Dad met Marin.
She was quiet, kind in a distant way, never pretending to be my mother. She didn't try to replace anyone, she just showed up. Like morning coffee, reliable, soft. I called her Marin. Not Mom. Not even stepmom. Just Marin. The funeral came and went too quickly. Strangers with familiar last names flew in, hugged me, and whispered condolences as if they knew me.
With the flowers, cakes, murmured prayers.
I stood beside Marin in a suit too big for me, watching her stare at the coffin. She didn't cry. I kept waiting for her to break, to collapse like people do in movies. But Marin stood still, jaw tight, hands clasped, holding the world together with sheer will. That night, the house was suffocatingly quiet. I lay in bed counting cracks in the ceiling, wishing for any sound to break the stillness. Then, a soft knock. Yes.
My voice cracked.
The door opened a little. Marin stood there, hair messy, wearing a thin robe, barefoot. She lingered in the doorway like she wasn't sure if she should speak. "Aren't you asleep?"
I shook my head.
"Can't. Neither can I." She stepped inside and closed the door. The room was dark, only the dim red glow of the digital clock between us. "Do you mind if I sit here for a while?" Her voice was soft, like she was afraid of waking ghosts. I shifted.
No.
She sat at the edge of the bed. Silence stretched, just the clock ticking and our quiet breathing. Then Marin spoke, almost to herself. "It feels like he's just away on a business trip. Like he'll walk through the door any minute." I nodded. "Yeah." Her eyes met mine, dark, exhausted, shimmering with something I couldn't name. "Remember our first trip to the beach?" she asked suddenly. I smiled.
Brighten.
I was 14. You made us all wear those ridiculous matching floral shirts. She chuckled softly. "Your dad hated them. But you smiled every time you saw him in one." Silence again, but this time warmer, almost comforting. Then Marin whispered something I didn't expect.
"I don't want to be alone tonight."
"Would you mind if I stayed here for a while?" I froze. "Here?" She nodded.
"I turn my back."
"I just need to feel someone next to me." I hesitated, then nodded.
She slipped under the blanket, back to me, shoulders trembling.
After a long moment she whispered, "You can hold me if you want." My hand hovered for a second before I wrapped my arms around her gently, as if hugging something fragile. She felt so small, cold, nothing like the strong woman who kept our home running, nothing like the wife who had been my father's anchor. That night, we just lay there. No words.
No thoughts.
Just grief, loneliness, and the faintest shared warmth in the dark. The next morning, nothing looked different. But something had shifted. Breakfast was the same. Fried eggs, toast, 2 cups of coffee. Maren sat at the table with the newspaper, her expression unreadable. "Did you sleep well?" she asked casually, not looking at me. "Not really." "Me neither." We ate in silence, but it wasn't peaceful anymore. It was heavy, making me swallow harder than usual. Days passed. Maren started taking care of me more. Too much. My coffee had exactly 2 spoons of cream. She made my bed though I hated anyone touching it. She reminded me to take vitamins, told me to go for walks. She never crossed a clear line, but little things started to unsettle me. A hand on my back, a lingering hug, her voice softening every time she said my name. I told myself it was just grief.
She lost everything.
My father was her whole world. But I couldn't deny it. I was starting to feel breathless around her. One night, I woke up and went for water. Maren stood by the kitchen window, still as a statue, staring out at the moonlit yard, a half-finished glass of wine in hand. She looked so tired, her hair loose, her shoulders slumped. I didn't say anything. She just turned, met my eyes, nodded slightly, then walked upstairs. The next morning, the wine glass was still in the sink. The more days passed, the more the air shifted. I started noticing things I hadn't before. The way she touched her neck when lost in thought, the way her gaze lingered on me a beat too long, how her voice dipped lower when calling me.
Y avoided her.
I stayed late at the library, brought home books I didn't read, fixed random things in the house just to keep busy. Maren didn't stop me. She didn't ask where I went. It felt like she understood, like we had a silent agreement not to get too close. One afternoon, Agnes, our neighbor, brought a misplaced letter. "You're staying with Maren?" she asked, smiling kindly.
Good. She must be lonely. That simple remark hit me like a punch.
From the outside, we looked like 2 people alone in a too-quiet house, roles blurring. That night, I came home late. The kitchen light was on. A plate of toast with strawberry jam, my favorite when I didn't want rice, sat waiting. No note. No call. Just that quiet gesture. I didn't eat. I just stood there, staring, feeling warmth and heaviness coil together in my chest. I didn't hate Maren. I couldn't. She was trying. She had no one else but me. But I knew if we stayed like this, something would break. Friday. It rained non-stop, the kind of rain that feels like it's washing the whole world away. I stayed in the library all day, pretending to work on my thesis, drinking cold coffee, watching raindrops race down the glass. I didn't want to go home. But at nearly 11 p.m., I finally did.
The house was quiet, too quiet. No TV, no music. Just the rain tapping against the eaves.
A sliver of yellow light spilled from Maren's door. I smelled wine before I even knocked. No answer. I pushed the door open. She sat on the floor, back against the bed, robe slipping off her shoulders, hair tangled. A half-empty wine bottle lay beside her, the glass still in her hand. The lamplight caught her pale, tired face, her eyes glistening with tears. She looked up at me, not startled, not embarrassed.
"You're back."
Her voice was hoarse, tinged with that familiar soft sarcasm. I swallowed hard.
"Are you okay?"
I asked knowing the answer. She didn't answer right away, she just looked at me. A look that was longer than usual and more intense than I wanted. "No one's talked to me all day," Maren said softly. Setting her glass down on the carpet, "I haven't been out," I replied, trying to keep my voice neutral. She chuckled. "Why? Go out? Everywhere is empty at home. At least you'll come through the door, and I'll hear your footsteps on the floor." I was silent. I didn't know how to respond to something so true. "I'm sorry," she said, looking down at the bottle. "I know. You're embarrassed." "I know." I walked in, bent down to pick up the bottle, intending to put it away. "Don't," Maren said quickly, but didn't snatch it back. "Just leave it there. I don't drink anymore."
He put the bottle on the
bedside table. "Have you had dinner?"
She shook her head. "Let me do something."
"No need." Her voice was small, broken, then as if she had lost the strength to hold herself together she continued, "Did you know? Elias told me that if anything happened to him you would be the only one I could trust." I turned and stood still. Marin was looking at me, her eyes watery, no longer smiling. "I think that's true," she said, "but I also find it cruel. I don't know what compelled me to sit down next to her. Maybe it was pity, maybe it was fear that she would fall to the floor and fall asleep there." She turned to me, her eyes red. "Do you ever feel like you're the leftovers, not really family, not the chosen one, just the one left behind?" I looked at her. At that moment all I saw was a woman
Sinking what down by all the things no one thought to ese how to endure and ten.
Without warning she leaned down and kissed me. Her kiss wasn't long, but it was enough to freeze me for the first second, not because I was drawn in but because I didn't believe it was really happening. Her lips touched mine, lightly trembling and smelling of alcohol. It wasn't a kiss of passion, it was more like an uncontrollable outburst of pain, weak, almost desperate. I didn't respond. I didn't push her away right away. I think I was too surprised to do anything. When I realized it, I pulled back gently, placing my hands on her shoulders to keep her distance, not hard, not jerking. "Just a clear signal, Marin," I said softly, and directly she opened her eyes. And immediately I saw nothing in them but shame. "I'm sorry," I said, though I didn't know what I was apologizing for. She bowed her head, covering her face with her hands. "No, it's my fault," she whispered, her voice choked. "I shouldn't have. I'm sorry." I stood up and walked out of the room, not daring to slam the door too hard, but I turned back, poured a glass of water and placed it on the nightstand. Then I went into the kitchen and made a cup of ginger tea. When I returned she was still sitting on the floor, her head against the bed, her eyes hazy as if she had just woken from a troubled dream. "Drink this," I said, "it will help you sleep better." She took the cup of tea in both hands. She said nothing, just nodded. I turned to leave, but before she left the room she called me back. "Silas, thank you for not making things worse," she said, "and for being so nice." I nodded slightly, not knowing what to say. Then I walked out of the room. That night I didn't sleep. I lay in bed, eyes wide open, feeling like 1,000 waves were crashing against my chest, not from anger, not quite fear. I felt sad for Marin, for me, for the way grief can distort the most beautiful things. The next morning no one mentioned what had happened. Men didn't come down to the kitchen. I made myself a simple breakfast. She didn't text, didn't call. We didn't see each other all day, but I knew between two people who had once shared the same roof, the same silent sleep, there was now a rift that could never be mended. I also knew I couldn't stay here forever. Aunt Min arrived on a Wednesday afternoon carrying 3 suitcases, a paper bag of homemade cookies, and a razor-sharp gaze. "I can't leave Marin alone right now," she said when I greeted her on the steps. "Honestly, Elias would be disappointed if he knew how quiet things were." I smiled wryly, helping her lug the luggage into the house. She was Dad's older sister, 5 years his senior, lived in Denver, and almost never visited except for special occasions or funerals. Men heard the noise and emerged from the kitchen, her face showing no sign of concealing her surprise. Marin, they looked at each other for a few tense seconds, then she stepped forward and gave Marin a quick, cool, polite hug. I stood beside her, feeling the air in the house drop several degrees. That evening the 3 of them ate together for the first time since the funeral. Aunt Maureen ate and asked me all sorts of questions: how Silas was doing, how was school, if he was thinking about moving out. The last sentence made me choke up. "I'm just asking," she added, as if it were a random question. "You're 21, right?" I nodded yes. Marn was silent, eating her food. I had the feeling she was trying to shrink into that wooden chair. After dinner she pulled me out onto the back porch. The air was cold. She pulled a cigarette from her coat pocket. I didn't know she smoked. Maybe she had just started. She looked at me through the smoke. "How is Marin?" I shrugged. "She's fine, really." I was silent. She nodded as if she already knew the answer. "Silas," she said, "I know you're a good man, but sometimes good men can get dragged into some dark places if they're not careful." I turned to look at her. "What do you mean?" "I'm living with a woman who just lost her husband, and I'm the only one in the house. It's not a simple environment, especially when there's no Real blood relationship between the two of you. I stiffened. I tried to keep my composure. I understand, but there's nothing wrong with that. She took a deep breath, then stubbed out her cigarette on the railing. I hope so, she said, and if nothing's happened yet, it's even better to keep it that way.
She walked into the house, leaving me standing there.
My hands cold despite the long sleeves I was wearing. I wasn't angry. She hadn't said anything wrong, but that's why her words felt like a knife to the part of me I was trying to hide. I did nothing wrong, but I can't deny something in this house isn't right anymore. The atmosphere in the house changed completely in the days that followed. Aunt Morin didn't say much, but her presence made every action in the house suddenly weighty. Every step I took down the hall, every accidental touch between me and Marin in the kitchen felt like an invisible gaze. She didn't ask any more questions, but she watched every gesture, every look, and I knew Marin felt it too. She became more reserved, less talkative, less in the kitchen, no longer making coffee for me in the morning, no longer calling me down to eat in the soft voice she used to. She backed away clearly and deliberately, and that somehow made me feel emptier. One afternoon, I was standing on the porch when I heard Aunt Mean in the kitchen. Her voice was low, but I heard it clearly. What do you think Elias would think if he saw you taking care of him like that? I didn't hear Marin's answer. There was only a long pause, then the sound of dishes clattering together, light and sporadic, as if she were trying to keep her hands busy rather than eating. I turned away and walked down to the backyard. I didn't want to hear more, not because I was afraid of the truth, but because I didn't know who I should be protecting that evening. I walked into the kitchen earlier than usual. Marion was cooking something. Aunt Morin was sitting at the table flipping through a magazine. I helped Marin put vegetables in her bowl. Our hands touched briefly. Just a very small touch, but I felt her eyes on my back, cold, precise, and not moving away from the spot where it had just happened. Men paused, pulled her hand away, didn't look at me. She washed her hands more thoroughly than usual, as if to wash away something she didn't want to face. After dinner, I was about to go upstairs when my aunt called me back. Silas, she said, I'm leaving tomorrow. I looked at her surprised. I think Marin needs her own space, and you. I nodded slowly. I said nothing before leaving the table. My aunt left a sentence. You're an adult, now live like someone who knows your limits. That night, I sat in my room, the window open, letting the cold wind in as a way of cleansing. I don't know if Aunt Marine saw anything. I don't know if she was right or wrong. I just knew for the first time I was living on a very thin wire, and I couldn't take another step without sending someone down with me. I found the box one Saturday afternoon cleaning out the attic. Not that I wanted to, I just needed something to do, something to keep my hands busy. Instead of spinning it around in my head after a Marine left, the house became quiet in a different way. No more judgmental looks, but no more words. Either Men was mostly in the kitchen or in her room. She avoided me, and I didn't blame her for that. The box sat deep in the corner of an old wooden cabinet covered in dust, rope tied around the lid. No lock, no name. I was about to just put it aside, but then something stopped me. Maybe it was intuition, maybe it was something else I couldn't name. I sat down on the floor, untied the rope, opened the lid. The first thing I saw was a black and white ultrasound. The dust of time had faded it a little, but the familiar little shape of a curled fetus was still visible. I was stunned. Underneath was a stack of handwritten letters, neatly folded. All were signed Elias. I didn't read them all. I didn't dare. I just stared at the first line of one. To my Marin, I didn't think I was lucky enough to have a second family until you came into my life. The paper was yellowed, the ink smudged in places. I didn't know when these letters were written, before or after I came into their lives, but I did know one thing. There was a pain in this house that I had never been told about. I put everything back in the box, tied it up, and sat still for a long time. My head was spinning, not from shock but from an unnameable pain. Marin had been pregnant with my father. That child didn't exist, and I was probably the only person she had left after all that loss. For the first time I saw more clearly why everything had gone so wrong, why a woman as meticulous and calm as Marin could have lost her way like that. She hadn't just lost her husband, she had lost her child. I took the box downstairs. That evening Marin was sitting on the sofa, her legs drawn up, wrapped in the green wool blanket she wore in the winter. She Wasn't reading, she wasn't watching TV, she was just sitting there staring into space. The lamp beside her cast a yellow light on half her face, making her look like an old faded photograph. I put the box on the table in front of me. She looked at it, then at me. Silence, the kind of silence that left no room for pretense. I found it when I was cleaning the attic. I said I didn't mean to. She didn't answer right away. She just looked at the box as if it were a severed part of herself. Now returned after a moment. She nodded. I knew you would. Is it your father's child? I asked softly. Yes, she said, her voice little more than a sigh. A girl died at 6 months.
He sat down in
the chair across from her. She didn't cry, but her eyes were drained. I never told anyone because I didn't want anyone to feel sorry for me, she said. Not even Elias. He knew, but he never mentioned it. I nodded, waiting for her to continue. There are pains that people hide because they're afraid that if they tell they'll become who they are, and I don't want to be your mother that way. I didn't know what to say except to say it sincerely. I'm sorry you had to endure that alone. She pursed her lips. I thought I was over it, but then Elias died, and suddenly everything that had been pushed to the bottom came to the surface. I looked at her. Did you mistake me for someone else? Maren shook her head. No, you're right. I know who you are, but sometimes when people lose everything, they start clinging to whatever they have left, and you're the only thing I have left. We sat in silence for a long time. Then I said slowly, I think it's time for me to leave. Maren turned, not startled, just looked at me and nodded. I know I'm not keeping you. I need to learn how to live alone again. I nodded. Something inside me felt lighter, though it still hurt before I stood up. Maren took my hand gently. Silas, she said, her voice shaking but steady, you were never a replacement. You are you, and I am grateful for that. I squeezed her hand just once, then I stood up and left the room. That night, for the first time in weeks, I slept straight through the night, not because everything was okay, but because I had finally looked the truth in the face, and the truth, no matter how painful, is always easier to breathe than silence. From that day on, Maren and I had no more deep conversations. We didn't argue, we didn't avoid each other in a clear way, we just didn't seek each other out like before. The house still had the sound of footsteps, the clanking of dishes, the sound of running water from the faucet, but no more people calling each other in the morning. I woke up later. She didn't prepare coffee anymore. I didn't ask at dinner. Sometimes we ate separately. Sometimes we ate together but only exchanged vague sentences like, it's colder today, or, the fridge is almost
out of milk.
What was between us now was no longer distance, it was a dry crack so long and deep that no one dared to step foot in it to patch it. I started sleeping in the library a few nights a week, not because I didn't have a place to stay, but because I needed to breathe, really breathe, without fear of someone watching me from behind the curtains or from the dark hallway. There I sat among the bookshelves, the dim yellow light, the smell of old paper, and felt safe. One day, an old librarian named Ruth gave me a blanket. Every boy who reads until dawn needs one, she said without further questions. I smiled and said, thank you. No one at the library asked me why I slept over. Maybe it was because this small town was used to the anomalies of people who were grieving and didn't know how to name them. Although I avoided Maren, I noticed every little change in her. She started walking more, or sitting on the back porch reading a book that didn't turn more than 3 pages at a time. Her hair was tied back, her collar was tighter, her softness had been replaced by order and silence. One time I saw her holding the ultrasound box I had found, not opening it, just wiping the dust off the lid, then putting it back in the drawer under the stairs. The action made my chest tighten. Maybe she was learning to let things be like me. One morning in early winter, I came home earlier than usual. It was drizzling. I saw Maren standing on the porch holding a cup of tea, looking out at the backyard covered with wet leaves. I almost called out, but I stopped. There are moments when if you touch it, it will break immediately, and I know this is one of them. Night fell faster than I remembered it would this time of year. Maybe it was the clouds, maybe it was the darkness growing inside me. I started dreaming, not often, but enough to wake me up in the middle of the night, heart pounding, throat dry. In the dream, I found myself running. I wasn't sure who or what I was running from. All I knew was that there were Shadows all around me, dim, silent, not calling my name but making me feel like I was being watched. When I woke up I couldn't remember anyone's face. All that was left was a heavy feeling pressing down on my chest like a wet blanket that wouldn't let go. I wasn't the child in this house anymore, but I wasn't really the man who could walk out either. I found myself caught between two roles. Part of me still wanted to stay to make sure Marin was okay, and the other part wanted to leave so we could both have a chance to live for real. I thought about renting a room near the school. I had a bunch of tabs open on my computer looking for a house, but every time my hand reached for the book an appointment button I closed it. I was afraid, not afraid of leaving her, but afraid that if I left it would really be the end. There would be no chance to make things right. There would be no us in any role. One evening, I went to the kitchen to get some water. Marin was there for the first time in days. We stood facing each other without avoiding each other. She looked at me, her hands still on the handle of the teapot. I looked back, my hands gripping the back of the chair. There was a long pause, and then I blurted out, "Are you happy living here?" She was stunned, then she shook her head slowly. "Not anymore." I nodded. Me too. No one said anything more, but something had been released, not completely, but enough to breathe. That night I wrote a letter asking to move out of the university dorms, not because I hated her, not because I wanted to forget, but because if I still loved her as someone who used to be family, the best way to keep it was to get out of each other's lives at the right time. 2 days later, I moved out. Marin walked me to the door, not crying. She put a small paper bag in my hand. Inside was a scarf she'd knitted the previous winter and a letter. "Silas, don't think you did anything wrong. We're just lost in a great sadness. I hope one day you'll remember it all, not with shame but with compassion, because no matter what, you're the only one who makes this life not completely empty." Marin. I folded the letter carefully. Tamsin returned to town at the end of March. I heard from a classmate she had just finished an internship in Boston, taking a semester off to care for her mother who was recovering from a knee injury. Her text message arrived on a rainy afternoon. "I heard you're still in Willowridge. I'm back. Coffee?" I stared at the message for nearly 10 minutes before replying, "Yeah, okay, weekend." Tamsin was the last person in my life I could call close. We'd been together in our sophomore year. No drama, no strings attached, the kind of relationship that was deep enough to stick, light enough to fall apart without resentment. She was smart, open, and asked questions that made me think. When we broke up, there were no tears, just a long conversation ending with a hug. "And if we ever see each other again, I hope we can still have coffee." Now I don't know if I'm ready to sit with the past, but I go anyway. The coffee shop is on the main street about 3 blocks from the library. Tamsin takes a table by the window. When I walk in, she's sitting there, a latte in front of her, a cream turtleneck, her hair pulled back like it used to be. She smiles when she sees me. "Silas, you look you." I sit down, chuckling. "I hope that's a compliment." She tilts her head. "It's a compliment and a warning. We talk like old friends. No pressure about school, part-time jobs, movies, a few mutual friends we've lost touch with." Then Tamsin takes a sip of coffee, sets the cup down, and says, "How long did you live with Marin after Elias died?" I'm not startled nor surprised that the question will come. "About 4 months." She nodded. "I heard they say you were very attached to her." I looked out the window where the branches were beginning to sprout. "She's the only one left." Tamsin didn't speak right away. Then she leaned toward me. "Silas, I'm not asking this to interrupt, but are you sure everything's okay?" I looked up at her. The question wasn't heavy, but it hit me deep, a place I'd tried to bury for so long. "Okay, in what way?" I asked softly. "Okay, in the sense that you're not the one carrying something that shouldn't be yours." I didn't answer Tamsin's question right away. Instead, I looked down at my hands, fingers clasped together, trembling slightly, not because of the cold but because I knew she was right. I'd been carrying something with me all winter, something nameless, shapeless, just the feeling that I was keeping a secret that wasn't mine. I raised my head. "I didn't do anything wrong, Tam. I know," she said softly. "I never thought you were a bad person, but sometimes you put up with more than you should. You keep quiet, you endure, you try to do the right thing to the point of tying yourself up." I smiled sadly. "I just thought I was doing the right thing, maybe." She nodded. "But should isn't always right for you." Silence fell over the table for a few more seconds, then Tamsin spoke as lightly as a breeze. Through a cold cup of coffee. Are you still there with Marin? Even in the dorms I don't live with her anymore, I said, but I still stop by just to drop off something she needs or to check she's okay. She nodded, not smiling, not sad, just understanding. I'm not saying you should cut it off, she said. I just want you to know sometimes the best way to keep someone is to step out of a role you don't belong in. We left the cafe in the late afternoon. The rain had stopped. The wind was damp and cold. Before we parted, Tamsin turned to me, touched me lightly on the shoulder. You're a good person, Silas. Don't let yourself get caught up in guilt for anyone. I looked at her. I meant it. Thanks for saying that. Thanks for listening. She smiled. Then she turned away, walking into the misty street, small but steady. That night I didn't visit Marin as planned. I just sat in my room, looking at the old letter she left in my bag when I left, reading it again, not because I wanted to remember but to make sure I understood. I didn't go to Marin's house again for almost 2 weeks after meeting Tamsin. No text, no call, no explanation. I thought she understood, and if she didn't, I wasn't sure I had the words to make it clear. Silence is sometimes the most precise language between two people who were once too close and then forced to become distant at the right time. But then one morning in early April I received a letter from Morin, not an email, not a text. It was a handwritten envelope in familiar handwriting addressed to the university. Silas, I'm not writing to bring you back. I'm writing to say I'm fine. I've started to get back into my old routine: morning tea, walks in the park, and redoing the bakery's ledger. There's a corner of the house I haven't been in for months, the room that holds the box you found last week. I opened the door, dusted it, burned an incense stick, and for the first time didn't cry. You were my last hold. Now I want you to be my sweetest memory. If you want, you can come back one last time, not to start over but to end it right. Marin. I read the letter 3 times, and that afternoon I went. The house didn't look much different, but the feeling inside was different. The air was softer, lighter, no more invisible cracks that made you choke every time you walked through the hallway. No more waiting looks, no more silent backs trying to hold someone back.
Just Marin sitting on the back porch holding a cup of tea, smiling when she saw me. "Ella make the kind you likes," she
said. I sat down next to her, nodding thanks. We drank our tea in silence. I thought I wouldn't recover, Marin said after a moment of silence, not because of losing Elias but because I found myself becoming someone I didn't recognize. I put down my cup of tea and turned to look at her. She wasn't crying, she wasn't shaking, she was just calmer than I'd seen her in months. "I understand," I said. I didn't recognize myself during that time either. She nodded, her eyes looking out into the backyard where the trees were starting to sprout green leaves. Loss weakens you, but sometimes it also teaches you to separate what's real from what you need to let go. I let out a long breath, relief, like someone had just taken a bag of ice off my chest without hurting me. "I've been thinking a lot," I said, "about how things turned out, about what happened and what didn't." She tilted her head, looking at me. "And I don't regret staying," I continued. "I just regret that we didn't know how to be together at the right time, in the right way." Marin smiled. It was a sad smile, but a gentle one. "Not everyone in life comes in to stay," she said. "Some people come in just to teach you something." I nodded, and I learned. She put her hand on mine one last time, not squeezing, not holding, just a very light touch, a wordless thank you. Before I stood up, I said, "I hope you live lightly like this afternoon." She looked at me, her eyes soft and bright. "And I hope you, when you think back on it all, you won't blame yourself." I nodded. Then I turned and walked out of the backyard through the wooden door that creaked when the wind blew. This time I didn't look back. I returned to Willowridge one early summer afternoon nearly 5 years later. No particular reason, just a feeling in my gut, a familiar whisper soft as a breeze through the window, that it was time I
drove back from the city through the maple line streets through the neighborhood where you said to bike to
school, past the old soccer field where I used to bench all summer. Everything was the same, only I was different. I had lived in 2 different states, worked 3 jobs, and finished a dissertation
on adolescent education. Had fallen in love, broken up with someone, and 11
again chosen to live alone. But something in me had never quite left this place. The White House sat as peaceful as the last time I had left it. There were lavenders on the porch, the old wooden chair was still there, and the wind chimes hanging in front of the door still rang every time the wind blew by, as if the past 5 years were just a long dream. I knocked on the door. No one answered, but
Gwenny stepped out into the back garden and saw her Marin sitting under the porch.
Reading a book next to the round wooden tea table. Her hair was more gray but her posture was still straight, her face was calm, and her eyes were no longer heavy. She looked up, saw me a moment of surprise, then smiled. "I'm back," she said. I nodded. "Just stopping by on my way to work." She nodded, pointing to the chair opposite. "Same place we sat there in the gentle afternoon sun under the shade of a plum tree in bloom." We didn't ask each other what we had been through. We didn't talk about the past years. We were just two people who used to be very close, now far enough to call each other by gentle words. I told her a little about my job, about the city I lived in, about the little cafe near my house that served waffles very similar to the ones she used to make. She told me about her bakery, about the group of old students who came to learn how to bake every Thursday, about the stray cat she had adopted named Oliver, and about the rose tree in her yard that was about to bloom for the first time in years. The conversation was light as a breeze, not a single note off. Before I left, I stood up and looked at her again. "Thank you," I said. She was surprised. "For what?" "For letting me go," I said, "and for not holding me back with things that made it impossible for me to leave."
She looked at me, her eyes warm. "Thank you for coming back the right way."
I nodded. We didn't hug. There was no need, just two people having overcome something no one had taught them how to face, and still holding on to the best of each other. As I drove away from Willowridge, I opened the window and let the wind blow through my hair. I didn't look back, not because I didn't want to look, but because this time I brought peace with me. No more unanswered questions, no more blurred lines, just clarity, and the nameless feeling returned to its rightful place. I've been to many places, met many people, but perhaps no one has taught me more than Marin, not by what she said but by what we both stopped doing. We walked lost in each other's sadness, but after all we made the right choice by letting go without losing each other. Thank you for staying with me. Subscribe.